This is hopefully the last Game Boy buying guide you will ever need. Let's be real here, there's already a bunch of videos on this, but I want to make one that's quick and easy and hopefully helps you buy your first and hopefully last Game Boy. So first off, there are three systems technically. You have your Game Boy, you have your Game Boy Color, you have your Game Boy Advance. And we grouped them into these three categories because there was some kind of technological jump that required us to get a new cartridge with each one of these systems. To keep it simple, I just want a blanket statement that you should buy a Game Boy Advance. It's backwards compatible with all the systems, it can play all the games, and so why wouldn't you buy a Game Boy Advance? Maybe you're somebody who found a reason to buy a different model, and is there a reason? Yeah, there's modding scene for the Game Boy, it's huge. But if you're just going to buy one, we're talking about the Advance. And let's start off with what not to buy. Do not buy a Game Boy Micro. The Game Boy Micro was the last Game Boy Advance to release, and it only plays Game Boy Advance games. It is not backwards compatible with the original or the Color. Also, do not buy a DS Lite and think it's going to be a substitute for a Game Boy Advance. It's not. Again, this does not play original Game Boy, and it does not play Game Boy Color. You do want an actual Game Boy Advance. Is there a certain model? Yes. The best model, if you just want Nintendo branded hardware, don't want to do any more searching, a Game Boy Advance SP, and you want to look for AGS 101 model. What does that mean? AGS 101 is a backlit display Game Boy Advance SP. AGS 101 is going to be displayed on the back of the console. There's like the sticker with the serial number and everything on the back. It'll say model number AGS 101. The previous model is the AGS 001. This one has a front lit display. If you want to save some money, find a front lit one. It'll still look pretty good. It's not going to be as bright, but you're going to save some money that way if you're only going to buy just one Game Boy. However, there are better Game Boys out there, and if you're willing to tinker, buy yourself a Game Boy Advance, the original one. Well, why? I mean, you like to tinker? You have a soldering iron? Good to go. There is a huge modding community. Everything from new IPS screens to USB-C rechargeable batteries, and it makes a difference. Just don't be surprised if you go down this road, you end up dropping like $200 to get every mod of your dreams, or even more than that, because by the time you do new shells, new buttons, new battery, then you do a new screen, it really gets up there in price. Since we're still talking about hardware, we do need to talk about emulation because there are some seriously heavy hitters out there doing emulation right now. And I've got two that I really like. They do different things. The first one is the GB Operator by Epilogue. Now this guy is $50 and just connects to your PC or Mac. Reads your cartridges, you can back up your save files, and it'll tell you if you have authentic cartridges as well. I think this is a great option if you just have some cartridges you want to dump onto your PC, and make sure your save files never die. Now the second one I want to talk about is if you're looking at modding a Game Boy and you're like, wow, that's a big price tag and a lot of work, look at an Analog Pocket. These guys basically built the ultimate Game Boy in that original Game Boy Color format, plays all the Game Boy games, does emulation for other systems as well. Like you can get Game Gear adapters and plug in your Game Gear cartridges. You can put all your ROMs on an SD card if you want to. The options are kind of limitless with the Analog products, and so if you want something that is not necessarily original hardware but has a really good feel to it and an excellent screen, by the way, I would definitely look at the Analog because you might end up spending just as much as on a Pocket as you would modding your own Game Boy. Lastly, let's do a quick talk about games because there are, fake games out there all over the place. And so how do you spot those and which ones do you buy, which shouldn't you buy? First caveat, if you just can't afford the physical games, I totally get it. Nintendo does a bad job of making all of their old games accessible. So if you gotta get ROMs, gotta put it all on an EverDrive, just plug it in your GBA and never think about a game again, totally get it. Understand, and you can go that route. Just find whatever way to play that makes sense for you. Let's talk about easy ways to tell if a game has been faked. So for a cartridge game, the easiest way to tell right off the bat is when you look at the front label. On the Game Boy Advance games at least, there's a little number stamped into it. Usually in the right upper side of that corner, there's like 2 digits, and that was basically their wave, whatever wave they produced. And not every cartridge has this, so don't panic if it's not there, but the label is the easiest way to tell. Look at the writing of the label, look at the glossiness, look at the ESRB logo or the Nintendo logo. Make sure everything looks correct. Know your label before you go to buy the game. If the number stamp doesn't do it for you, get yourself a set of tools. Have a Tri-Wing, have a Gambit. These will save you time and headache later. If somebody won't let you open the cartridge to check out a game, you probably shouldn't be buying that. So open up that cartridge and know what your board looks like. There's Google images everywhere, but the biggest tells are if the battery doesn't look quite right. Does it have that yellow border? Is it kind of at an angle or is it horizontal? Horizontal ones are bad, angled ones are good. Does it have like a little glob of black goo kind of looking on the board? That is not a real Nintendo cartridge then. Generally, cartridges just have the main two chips on them, usually one horizontal and one vertical on the GBA games. Game Boy games and Game Boy Color games are all a little different. Usually those have one big main chip and a battery to save. But again, just know your board. That is the biggest thing. Once you open those up, you can usually tell pretty quickly if it's a wrong board because there's all kinds of weird things you didn't expect. Extra chips or extra traces, extra globs of gooey things, batteries in the wrong places. Those are all big red flags and you should just avoid that cartridge. And this is especially important for Pokemon games. These are the most commonly faked ones because a lot of people want Pokemon games. So really know the boards. Make sure that the battery's in the correct place. If you're buying like Fire Red or Leaf Green, there should be no battery because that's a batteryless game. And then anything older than that should have a battery. So if the battery's missing, again, you're not buying the correct game. And I'm going to leave you with one last tip here because I don't want to go too long, but Game Boys are region free. In an era where a lot of things were region locked, looking at the PlayStation, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, a lot of these consoles, you couldn't just buy games from another region. The Game Boy is not that way. Feel free to buy games from the EU. If that game is $10 cheaper over there, why not? Get yourself that different region game to save some money. There's really no reason not to. It also opens up the library to do some fun collecting and trading with some international games if you really wanted to. So what do you think? Depending on when you watch this, maybe the analog pocket's not on top anymore. Maybe we have a better emulator. Is there a better system mod? I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below. Hit that subscribe button and tell me what your favorite way is to play Game Boy games. And we'll catch you next time.